She drove into the desert to die. No water, no plan, no hope left in her broken heart. The scorching sun was supposed to be her final companion, but when she opened her eyes, a stranger's fire was keeping her alive. In the middle of nowhere, she discovered a hidden community where people heal not by forgetting their pain, but by transforming it into something beautiful, where two shattered souls would find that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. If you're ready for a journey of healing, transformation, and unexpected love, hit that like button. Subscribe for more powerful stories, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from right now. Trust me, this story will change how you see loss, hope, and the courage to start over. The house breathed without her. Eliza could feel it in the way the floorboards settled, in the whisper of air through rooms that had once held laughter. She stood in the doorway of what used to be their bedroom, her fingers tracing the smooth wood of the frame, where David's shoulder had worn a groove from years of leaning against it while putting on his shoes. Everything spoke his name. The coffee, cup still sitting in the sink, the book folded open on the nightstand with his thumb's impression still visible on page 47. She had not moved these things, could not. They were the last evidence that he had existed beyond the hollow space in her chest. The funeral flowers had withered weeks ago, but their ghost scent lingered, mixing with the cedar cologne that still clung to his pillow. Eliza pressed her face into the fabric, breathing in what remained of him, and felt her ribs crack a little. More. She had stopped answering the phone. The well-meaning voices of friends and family felt like static against her eardrums. Their words were water poured over stone, rolling off, leaving no mark, changing nothing. Time heals all wounds, they said. He wouldn't want you to suffer like this. As if they had known David better than she had. As if they understood the particular shade of blue his eyes. The melody he would hum during breakfast preparations lingered in her memory, perpetually flat and endearing. Each new day unfolded before her like an indictment. 16 more hours to occupy with the burden of his missing presence. Another day of purposeless breathing stretched ahead. Without conscious decision, her feet carried her to the garage where her fingers reached for the car keys suspended from their small brass hook. David had installed that hook himself. For staying organized, he'd explained, though he never once utilized it, preferring to drop his keys on whatever nearby surface presented itself. The metal felt icy and unfamiliar against her skin. She hadn't operated a vehicle since the tragedy. The concept of moving ahead had felt like abandoning him. Yet standing there among the dusty tools and David's unfinished projects, something stirred within her chest. Not optimism. She was too depleted for that. But something more instinctive, an understanding that remaining here meant suffocating. She climbed into the vehicle. The pavement vanished beneath her tires like a vow being dissolved. Eliza traveled without purpose, following highway markers that held no significance, Phoenix, Flagstaff, places that belonged to someone else's existence. The radio broadcast melodies she couldn't process. The odometer accumulated distance like tiny deaths. The scenery transformed slowly, then suddenly. Residential areas yielded to wilderness. Mountain peaks jutted upward like fractured bones piercing the sky, and the atmosphere itself seemed to rarefy, as though the planet were releasing its final exhale. She continued until her fuel gauge demanded attention, pulling into a roadside. A facility where the workers possessed eyes that held the specific compassion reserved for the visibly displaced. "You traveling to anywhere particular, ma'am?" His tone carried the desert's weight. Parched, patient, infinite. Eliza gazed at this unfamiliar person who had posed the question she couldn't resolve. Somewhere particular, as though any location could hold meaning when every place felt identical without David. Elsewhere, she finally responded. The word felt gritty against her tongue. He nodded as though this response made complete sense. Roads extend in both directions around here. You keep that in mind. She purchased water she wouldn't consume and drove deeper into the barren expanse. The sun ascended higher, an unforgiving observer of her small act of defiance against persistence. The pathway became dirt, then grooves, then barely a hint carved into crimson soil. When her vehicle finally wheezed to a halt, the engine struggling against the heat, Eliza experienced something resembling peace. She had traveled as far from her former existence as the earth would permit. The quiet here differed from before, not the condemning stillness of vacant rooms, but something more ancient, more expansive. The silence of entities that had never required speech. She emerged into heat that felt substantial, breathing fire that scorched her lungs. The desert extended in every direction like divine refuse. Saguaro cacti lifted their limbs in eternal capitulation. Somewhere a hawk screamed once before quieting. Eliza walked not toward any destination, but away from the final connection anchoring her to a world that no longer suited her. Her water remained behind in the car. Her phone's battery expired, bringing her satisfaction. Each footstep carried her further from the woman who had loved and been cherished, deeper into the void she had been pursuing. The sun reached its peak and began its gradual decline, coloring the heavens the shade of aged blood. Her legs shook, then collapsed. She settled into the dirt and felt it sear through her clothing. Perfect. She craved sensation, even if only agony. Night arrived slowly, then completely. The desert evening was an entirely different entity, cool, vibrant with the murmurs of unseen creatures. Stars materialized like needle holes in dark cloth, more celestial bodies than she had ever witnessed from her suburban refuge. She reclined against the ground and allowed it to support her. Distant coyotes called to one another. She shut her eyes and waited for dawn to determine her destiny. She awakened to smoke and shadows, to the sensation of being observed by eyes that had witnessed too much. Her mouth held the taste of metal and grit. Momentarily she couldn't recall her location, why her resting place felt so rigid, why her bones ached as though she had been shattered and carelessly repaired. Then memory returned. The journey, the walking, the surrender to emptiness. She rose carefully, her sight wavering, and spotted him. He sat approximately 10 feet distant, feeding small branches to flames that painted his features in shifting bronze. His hair flowed long and iron gray, adorned with feathers and tiny silver, ornaments that captured the firelight. His movements possessed the efficiency of someone who had constructed countless fires, who comprehended the patience necessary to coax flame from nothingness. Their gazes connected across the space separating them. His eyes were dark, the color of well water, and they held her stare without judgment or inquiry, as if discovering dying women in the desert formed part of his daily practice. "You're conscious," he said. His voice was deep, worn smooth by years, of speaking only when essential. Eliza attempted to reply, but her throat had become its own desert. He reached beside himself and lifted a water container, extending it without ceremony. She accepted it with trembling hands, drinking deeply, tasting minerals and snowmelt and something indefinably pure. "Thank you." The words barely formed a whisper, but he acknowledged them with a nod. He had covered her with a blanket she didn't remember receiving. Heavy wool that carried scents of cedar smoke and something else. Something that evoked her grandmother's embrace. "Safe things, familiar things, what's your name?" she inquired. "Tahoma." He added another branch to the fire. "You're Eliza." She spoke it as though recalling how to form the sounds. They remained in silence then, the kind that exists between individuals, who recognize that words can sometimes be smaller than the spaces they occupy. The fire crackled, launching sparks into the endless darkness. In the distance something howled, not mournfully but alive, present, claiming its territory in the world. "I was dying," Eliza said abruptly. She hadn't intended to speak, but the words emerged regardless. Tahoma regarded her steadily. "Were you?" She had anticipated confirmation, sympathy, perhaps urgency. His calm question surprised her. "Wasn't I?" "Fire dies," he said, prodding the flames with a lengthy stick. "Water evaporates, wind ceases." He glanced at her. "You're still breathing." It was the most straightforward assessment of her suicide attempt she could have imagined. Not a crisis requiring solution, not a tragedy demanding mourning, simply an observation. "You're still breathing," as if breathing alone constituted sufficient choice. She drew the blanket closer around her shoulders and observed the flames dancing. For the first time in months, she felt the present moment settle around her like skin. Here within this circle of firelight, with this stranger who had drawn her back from the precipice, without questioning why she had approached it, she was simply alive. Nothing more, nothing less. It felt like the beginning of something, though. She lacked words yet for what. Dawn arrived gently, unlike the previous day's merciless sun. Eliza woke to sage burning and coffee brewing over coals. Tahoma moved around the fire with practiced efficiency, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. Her body felt different, still exhausted, still hollow, but present in a way it hadn't been for months, as if her spirit had finally reunited with her flesh. "Where are we?" she asked, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong, bitter, authentic. "Between places," he said, settling beside the fire with his own cup cradled in weathered hands. "All the finest places exist between." Through the dim morning light, she could see they occupied a natural amphitheater. Red rock walls rose on three sides, the fourth opening to desert that stretched toward purple mountains. Ancient pictographs decorated the stone surfaces, spirals and figures and symbols that seemed to shift in the changing light. "Is this your home?" "One of them." He studied her face with those dark, patient eyes. "You have somewhere to return to." The question hung in the air between them. Return to what? The house that breathed without her presence. The workplace where people spoke in hushed tones when she passed. The life that had been severed in half, leaving edges too sharp to touch. "I don't know," she said honestly. He nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable response. "Most people believe they know their destination, usually incorrect. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, watching the desert awaken around them." A roadrunner darted between sagebrush. Somewhere a mourning dove called, its voice liquid and lonely and beautiful. "There's a place," Tahoma said eventually. "Good people who could use someone with gentle hands." "You don't know anything about my hands." He glanced at her, something that might have been humor flickering in his eyes. "You didn't die last night. Takes gentle hands to keep breathing when breathing hurts." The simple truth struck her unexpectedly. She had considered herself weak for continuing, for lacking the courage to let go completely. But perhaps there was a different kind of strength in persisting, in allowing each breath to draw her further from the edge. "What kind of place?" "Home," he said simply. "For people who need one." She looked at her hands wrapped around the warm tin cup. They were pale, soft from a life lived indoors, but they were steady. David used to say her hands were made for healing things. She had always thought he was just being romantic. "I wouldn't know how to." "Nobody knows how until they do." Tahoma stood, began gathering their few possessions with movements that spoke of many mornings like this, many camps broken and left to the desert. Choice is yours. I can drive you back to where you came from or forward to where you might be going. Forward. The word felt foreign in her mouth. For months she had only been capable of looking backward, of measuring the growing distance between herself and the last moment she had been whole. She stood slowly, her legs uncertain but willing. Forward, she repeated, and tasted possibility. The truck was older than some nations, held together by rust and stubbornness, and the kind of mechanical sympathy that comes from decades of gentle attention. It coughed to life like an elderly man clearing his throat, then settled into a rhythm that matched the desert's heartbeat. They drove mostly in silence, the landscape flowing past like meditation. Eliza found herself studying Tahoma's profile, the strong nose, the deep lines carved by sun and wind and experiences she couldn't imagine. There was a quality of stillness about him that went deeper than mere quiet, as if he had learned to carry peace within himself, like others carried keys, or wallets. "How did you find me?" she asked as they turned off the dirt road onto something that might generously be called a track. "Wasn't looking for you," he said, navigating around a boulder with practiced ease. "Was looking for something else entirely. Sometimes we find what we need instead of what we want." The settlement appeared gradually, emerging from the landscape, like something that had grown rather than been built. Adobe houses clustered around a central area, where smoke rose from outdoor ovens and children's voices mixed with the lowing of goats. Gardens terraced into the hillsides, green and impossible in this place of red earth and sparse rain. People looked up as they passed, men mending nets and tools, women grinding corn, children playing games that seemed to involve a great deal of running and laughing. Their faces were warm, curious, but not intrusive. Several raised hands in greeting. Tahoma nodded back with the dignity of someone accustomed to respect. "What is this place?" Eliza breathed. "What it looks like," Tahoma said. "People living." He stopped. The truck near a building that was larger than the others, but built with the same red adobe, the same respect for the natural curve of the land. An old woman emerged from the doorway, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints had earned their stiffness. "Anna," Tahoma said, stepping out of the truck. "I brought someone." The woman, Anna, looked at Eliza with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her hair was white as winter, braided with turquoise beads that caught the afternoon light. She wore a dress that had been mended many times, each repair done with different colored thread, creating a map of care across the fabric. "I can see." "That?" Anna's voice carried the hint of an accent Eliza couldn't place. "Question is, why?" "She needs a place to heal. Don't we all?" Anna studied Eliza more carefully, taking in the expensive clothes now wrinkled and stained, the soft hands, the way she held herself like someone learning to be fragile. "You running from something or to something, child?" Eliza looked between them, these two who spoke in riddles and seemed to understand each other perfectly. "I honestly don't know." Anna's face softened slightly. "Honest answer. Come then, we'll find you a place to figure it out." The interior of the building was cool and dim, smelling of dried herbs and clean cotton. Anna led her through a main room, where people sat in small groups, some talking quietly, others working with their hands, weaving, carving, mending. A few looked up with friendly curiosity, but no one stared. "Community house," Anna explained. "Meals, meetings, celebrations. Quiet place too when folks need it." She opened a door at the back of the building, revealing a small room with a single bed, a wooden chair and a window that looked out onto the gardens. Simple to the point of austerity, but clean and somehow welcoming. Are you sure?" Eliza touched the doorframe. "I don't have any money. I can't pay." "Money's useful for buying things you can't make yourself," Anna said. We make most. Everything we need here. You want to contribute, you'll find a way. Always work that needs doing. Always someone who could use gentle help. That phrase again, gentle help. As if they could see something in her that she had forgotten about herself. I don't know how long. Time isn't a line here, child. It's a circle. Stay as long as the circle holds you. Anna paused in the doorway. Supper's at sunset. Come if you're hungry, don't if you're not. No obligations except to be honest with yourself. She left Eliza alone in the small room, alone with the weight of kindness freely given, of acceptance offered without condition. Through the window, she could see children playing between the garden rows, their laughter bright as water. For the first time since David died, she felt the possibility that she might belong somewhere again. The days settled into rhythm without her noticing the transition. Eliza woke to the sound of roosters and wood smoke, fell asleep to coyote songs and the whisper of wind through adobe walls. Time moved differently here, measured not by clocks but by the angle of shadows, the opening of flowers, the communal gathering for meals as the sun painted the western sky in shades of copper and gold. She learned by watching, by offering small helps that were accepted without fanfare, how to grind corn with the heavy stone metate, the motion requiring patience and a kind of meditation that left her arms aching and her mind strangely quiet. How to tend the goats, who had opinions about everything and express them loudly. How to pull weeds without disturbing the delicate root systems of vegetables that somehow thrived in this desert soil. The people accepted her presence with the same matter-of-fact grace Tahoma had shown by his fire. They didn't ask about her past, or her plans, didn't offer sympathy for sorrows they could see but not name. Instead, they included her in the daily work of living, trusting that usefulness would heal whatever needed healing. Maria, whose face was round and kind and whose laugh came easily, taught her to bake bread in the outdoor ovens. The fire tells you when it's ready, she said, showing Eliza how to judge the heat by holding her hand near the opening. You learn to listen with your skin, not your mind. Old Joseph, who carved wooden bowls and spoons with hands that moved like prayers, let her watch him work. Wood wants to become something, he said, shavings curling away from his knife blade like small spirits taking flight. My job is to help it remember what. Even the children drew her in, their natural curiosity overcoming any adult awkwardness about the strange newcomer. They taught her games with stones and sticks, showed her secret places where water pooled in hollows of rock, brought her interesting insects and unusual feathers with the generous joy of those who had never learned to hoard wonder. But it was Tahoma who remained the greatest mystery. She saw him throughout the days, leading discussions in the community house, working in the gardens, helping repair a roof damaged by the previous winter's rare snow. People sought his counsel, his presence at important decisions, yet there was something held apart in him, a careful distance even in the midst of connection. He ate his meals alone, she noticed, participated in the evening gatherings, but always sat where he could see all the exits. Sometimes she caught him staring at the horizon with an expression that spoke of watching for something that might never come, or might come too soon. He's alone by choice, Anna said one evening as they cleaned dishes in the communal kitchen. Eliza hadn't asked, but Anna had a way of answering questions before they were spoken. Why? Everyone carries their ghosts differently. Anna scrubbed a pot with steady strokes. Some people heal by joining, others heal by serving from a distance. Both are necessary, both are sacred. Eliza dried the clean dishes, stacking them with the careful attention she had learned to bring to all tasks here. Everything mattered when nothing was wasted, when every bowl and spoon would be needed again tomorrow. What about people who can't? Figure out how to heal it all. Anna's hands stilled in the soapy water, Those people usually haven't figured out they're already healing. The fact that you're asking means you're already halfway there. That night, Eliza sat by her window and watched the stars emerge. The sky here was different than it had been in the suburbs. Darker, deeper, crowded with light that spoke of distances beyond imagining. She thought about David, about the plans they had made, the life they had been building with such careful hope. The pain was still there, would probably always be there. But it felt different now, less like a wound and more like a scar. Evidence of love given and received, proof that she had been blessed with something worth grieving. She was changing, she realized. Not healing exactly, but becoming something new. The woman who had driven into the desert to die was slowly being replaced by someone who could grind corn and tend goats and find meaning in the simple act of helping bread rise. It was terrifying and wonderful and utterly unexpected. Outside her window, a nightbird called once, then fell silent. In the distance, she could see a light burning in what she had learned was Tahoma's house, set apart from the others at the edge of the settlement. She wondered what kept him awake, what ghosts he carried, what distance he was trying to maintain, and why. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find a way to ask. She found him at dawn working in the garden that supplied the community with herbs for cooking and medicine. He moved between the rows like a shadow, his hands gentle on the plants, harvesting what was ready, leaving what needed more time. "Mind if I help?" she asked. He glanced up, considered her for a moment, then pointed to a basket beside the path. "Sage," he said simply. "Cut the stems about here." He showed her with his own hands the precise angle that would encourage new growth. They worked in silence for a while, the morning air cool and still. Eliza found herself watching the way he moved, the careful attention he paid to each plant. There was reverence in it, a recognition that they were taking life to sustain life, that the exchange deserved respect. "How long have you been here?" she asked eventually. "Long time." He straightened, stretching his back. "Before the community, helped Anna start it, bring people together. It must be satisfying, seeing what it's become." Something shifted in his expression, a brief shadow. That passed too quickly for her to interpret. Satisfaction is dangerous. Makes you think you deserve what you have. The cryptic response was so typical of him that she almost smiled. Everything he said seemed designed to make her think, rather than simply understand. "What happened to your family?" The question came out before she could stop it. Too direct, too personal for their careful friendship. He went very still, his hands frozen in the act of selecting herbs. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that she had finally asked the question that would make him retreat into the careful distance he maintained from everyone. "I had a wife," he said finally, his voice low and carefully controlled. "She died." The simple words carried the weight of unspoken complexity. Eliza recognized the tone. She had used it herself when people asked about David, the voice that said, "This is all I can tell you, and please don't ask for more." "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without comment. They returned to their work, but something had changed in the quality of the silence between them. Something had shifted, like a barrier cracking open to hint at hidden chambers beyond, though their mysteries remained concealed. "Your nightmares will fade." His voice broke the silence unexpectedly. Her head snapped up in surprise. "Pardon?" "The walls are thin here. I can hear you crying out while you sleep." His deep eyes found hers, compassionate yet direct. "It takes patience, but eventually they disappear." Embarrassment warmed her face. She'd believed her sorrow was contained within the small space Anna had provided. Learning that her anguish had seeped through the barriers, disrupting his peace, left her feeling vulnerable and mortified. "I had no idea, my apologies. Perhaps I should request different accommodations. That won't be necessary. He severed another plant stem, placing it gently in his collection basket. Nightmares aren't foreign to me. Sometimes knowing you're not struggling alone makes the burden lighter. His compassionate tone nearly broke her composure. She settled back, suddenly struck by the understanding that this man, her rescuer, the one who'd brought her to this sanctuary, carried wounds as deep as her own. His measured distance wasn't arrogance, but self-preservation. His quietness wasn't condemnation, but mutual comprehension. How do you endure it? Her voice barely escaped as a whisper. The same method you use. One inhale at a time, one sunrise. At a time, one simple duty at a time. He indicated the plants surrounding them. Recovery isn't a final stop. It's an ongoing journey. They completed their labor as the morning sun ascended, warming the soil beneath them. Walking back toward the main building together, Eliza sensed a transformation in their connection. Not passion, neither possessed the strength for such openness, but acknowledgement. Two souls fractured in separate ways, discovering together how to nurture the fragments. At the entrance, Tahoma hesitated. There are whispers, he began cautiously, regarding my wife's fate, concerning my role in what transpired. Eventually you'll encounter them. He paused, wrestling with words that carried significance beyond their sound. When that moment arrives, she encouraged softly, keep in mind that tales transform with each retelling. Reality is typically more subdued than gossip, more difficult to discern than blame. He departed, leaving her in the doorway, more puzzled than before, yet also more convinced of one truth. Whatever tragedy had befallen Tahoma's spouse, whatever responsibility he bore for her passing, it had hollowed out a cavity within him that mirrored the emptiness David's death had created in her. They were both spirits, she understood, both tormented by loves lost and lives disrupted. The distinction was that she had attempted to follow her phantom into oblivion, while he had elected to honor his by creating life for others. She wondered, for the remainder of the day, which path demanded greater bravery. The correspondence arrived on Tuesday, delivered by a mail carrier who appeared as misplaced in the community as an exotic bird among common sparrows. Anna presented it to Eliza. During breakfast, her expression deliberately composed. From your previous existence, she stated simply, placing the envelope next to Eliza's oatmeal bowl. Eliza gazed at her name inscribed in her sister's recognizable penmanship, at the sender's address that represented a reality increasingly resembling something imagined rather than experienced. Around her, the typical sounds of communal life persisted, multilingual conversations, children's laughter, the gentle percussion of utensils against ceramic dishes. There's no urgency to read it immediately, Anna murmured quietly. But Eliza was already tearing it open, her fingers acting almost independently. The paper within was luxurious, ivory-tinted, matching the stationery David had presented her for their final anniversary. Karen's message was inscribed in the meticulous handwriting she'd mastered in parochial school. Eliza, we're consumed with worry. You vanished without explanation, abandoned your vehicle in a remote location, disappeared as though you'd never been. Authorities have been searching, private detectives too, everyone. Mother is devastated. I understand your mourning, but this behavior is selfish, even by your standards. Those who care about you are in agony, questioning whether you're deceased, breathing, injured, abducted. How could you inflict this upon us? David has passed. We all grieve for him, but fleeing won't resurrect him. It won't mend whatever shattered within you. Return home. Seek professional help. Stop tormenting everyone who loves you. Legal issues require your attention. The property, David's life insurance, his business partnership. Adult obligations that can't wait for you to complete your soul searching. The expedition, or whatever this represents, Contact me upon receiving this, or preferably simply come home. Karen. The letter felt substantial in her grasp. Each sentence was a chain, dragging her back toward an existence organized around absence, where every discussion occurred in hushed whispers, and every gesture of kindness was tainted with sympathy. She sensed people observing her indirectly, detecting the change in her demeanor. Maria brushed her shoulder tenderly as she passed. One of the youngsters, little Roberto, came to rest against her chair with the natural compassion of those too young to fear sorrow. Troubling news from beyond? Anna inquired, taking the seat beside her. My relatives, they expect my return. Eliza creased the letter precisely, each fold serving not organization, but the desperate need to control something, anything. What are your desires? Such a straightforward question. Yet Eliza realized she hadn't posed it to herself in months. Since David's passing, she had navigated the world responding to others' expectations, requirements, demands, performing actions that belonged to her former self. I'm uncertain, she admitted honestly. I no longer know what I want. That evening found her walking the community's perimeter as daylight faded, the letter burning in her pocket like heated coal. The desert extended infinitely in every direction, vast and patient, offering no solutions to her dilemmas. She continued walking when Tahoma materialized beside her, moving with the silent elegance that made him seem part of the landscape itself, weighty. Contemplations? He asked. She retrieved Karen's letter, offering it without introduction. He read slowly, his expression revealing nothing, then returned it. Your sister cares deeply for you, he observed finally. My sister wants me to return to who I was previously. Eliza kicked a pebble, watching it bounce across the hardened ground. She expects me to resume a life that no longer exists. Perhaps she fears losing you as well. The observation was so gentle, so free from judgment that it surprised her. She had interpreted Karen's words as commands, ultimatums, criticism. But beneath the harsh language lay terror, the horror of someone who had already witnessed one. Person vanished from existence and couldn't bear losing another. I cannot become what they need me to be, Eliza said quietly. I cannot return to being the woman who made plans and schedules and had opinions about window treatments. She perished with David. Then who are you presently? They had stopped walking, standing where the settlement's illumination began fading, into desert darkness. Above them the initial stars appeared, tiny lights in the desert sky's vast clarity. I don't know yet, she replied. I'm still in the process of becoming. Tahoma nodded as though this made complete sense. Becoming requires time. Your family doesn't comprehend time the way the desert understands time. How long is sufficient for them? Probably never. For you? He looked directly at her, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. You'll recognize the moment when it arrives. It wasn't the response she'd hoped for, but it felt genuine in a way Karen's urgent demands did not. She was transforming, had been changing since awakening beside Tahoma's fire. The woman who might emerge from this metamorphosis remained mysterious, but she could sense her presence like a seed deep underground, drawing strength from darkness, preparing to reach toward illumination. I must respond to her, Eliza declared. What will your message be? Eliza gazed out at the desert, at the immense space that had embraced her while she was dying and was now teaching her how to live again. That I'm not lost, that I'm precisely where I belong. The answer surprised her with its certainty. For the first time since David's death, she knew something absolutely, without hesitation or doubt. This place, these people, this gradual process of becoming, it was correct. Not permanently, perhaps, but for now. That was sufficient. Summer intensified into a burden of heat that shimmered off the desert surface like visible melody. Eliza's palms grew rough from labor, her skin bronzed by sunlight. Her body adjusted to the pattern of rising before dawn and resting in shade during the merciless midday hours. She had composed 3 letters to Karen. The first had been defensive, explaining her decision in careful language designed to persuade. The second had been kinder, filled with descriptions of the community and her activities. The third, which she actually mailed, was straightforward. I am secure. I am healing. I am not prepared to return home. Please trust that I understand what I need currently. Send my love to Mother. Eliza. No return address, no commitments about when she might call or visit, just enough to alleviate worry, insufficient to invite debate. The children had completely adopted her, trailing her throughout the settlement like a small procession of curious ducklings. They shared games and songs, presented her with desert treasures, fascinating stones, fallen feathers, dried seed cases that rattled when shaken. In exchange, she shared stories, tended scraped knees and wounded feelings, gradually discovering herself becoming someone she'd never anticipated. You have a gift with them, Anna noted one afternoon, as they observed Eliza braiding young Sophia's hair with the patient care typically reserved for the most delicate work. I never imagined I would. Eliza fastened the braid with a ribbon Sophia had selected, bright blue against her dark hair. David and I discussed children, but she trailed off, surprised by the absence of pain in speaking his name. The grief remained, would always remain, but it had settled into something gentler, more integrated, like a stone smoothed by water, still present, but no longer sharp enough to wound. But, Anna prompted gently, but I believed I needed to understand myself before I could help someone else discover who they were meant to become. Eliza watched Sophia dash off to display her new braid to friends. Perhaps I was mistaken about that, or perhaps you're learning who you are by helping them learn who they are. It was another of Anna's observations that felt like truth arriving, disguised as simplicity. Eliza had arrived broken, convinced she had nothing to offer anyone. But the children saw her differently, as someone who listened to their stories, who remembered their favorite games, who could be trusted with secrets and fears and the countless small vulnerabilities of growing up. They made her feel valuable, in an unexpected way, not merely productive but essential, as though her presence in their lives mattered beyond the tasks she could perform. That evening, while helping prepare the communal dinner, she found herself working alongside Tahoma for the first time in weeks. He had been absent lately, not gone but distant, taking meals at off hours, working in settlement areas where others seldom went. "The children adore you," he said quietly, his hands busy chopping vegetables with precise, economical movements. "They adore everyone. It's their superpower." "No," he said, glancing at her. "They sense things, recognize who's safe, who cares, who sees them as they are, rather than who they might become. They've selected you." The words carried meaning beyond their surface. Being chosen by the children wasn't merely about acceptance, it was about recognition, about being deemed worthy of trust by those whose instincts hadn't yet been complicated by adult concerns. "Is that why you brought me here?" she asked. "Because you thought I might be good with children?" Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or something more complex. "I brought you here because you were dying, and this is a place for healing. What you do with the healing is your choice." They worked silently for a while, the familiar rhythm of preparation settling around them. But Eliza could feel something unspoken in the air between them, a tension that had been building for weeks. "The stories people don't tell," she said finally. "About your wife, about what happened, I think I need to know." his hands stilled on the cutting board. Around them the kitchen continued its cheerful chaos, people laughing, children running. Between adults' legs, the clatter of pots and the sizzle of cooking food, normal sounds of life being lived, which somehow made the weight of his silence more pronounced. Why? His voice was carefully neutral. Because you've become important to me. Because whatever burden you're carrying is affecting how you see yourself, how you let others see you. She set down her own knife, turned to face him fully. Because friends shouldn't have to carry secrets that heavy alone. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to lean closer to hear. "After dinner," he said, "when the others are settled, I'll tell you what happened. And then you can decide if you still want to know me." The words carried a finality that made her stomach tighten. Whatever he was going to tell her, he expected it to change things between them, to drive her away as it had apparently driven others away. She wanted to reassure him, to say that nothing could change her opinion of him, but she had learned enough about truth to know that such promises were hollow until tested. Instead, she simply nodded and returned to her work, counting the hours until she would finally understand why this good man carried himself like someone who deserved to be alone. They sat by his fire, the same place where she had first awakened to find him watching over her. The settlement was quiet around them, children asleep, adults settled into their evening routines. Only the crackle of burning wood and the distant call of night creatures broke the desert silence. Tahoma fed sticks to the fire with the same careful attention he brought to all things, building the flame slowly, patiently. Eliza waited, understanding that some stories required their own time, their own approach. "Her name was Ayana," he said finally. "Means eternal blossom in our language. She was—" He paused, searching for words. "She was light, laughter, the kind of person who made everyone around her feel more alive just by being present." His voice carried the particular tenderness reserved for speaking of the dead, the careful gentleness of someone handling something precious and fragile. "We were married young, built a life together in the traditional way. She taught the children, tended the sick, kept the old stories alive. I led hunting parties, settled disputes, did the things men do to protect and provide." He added another stick to the fire. "We were happy for 15 years. We were happy." Eliza watched his face in the firelight, saw the way speaking of that happiness both pained and comforted him. What happened? The year of the bad drought. Streams dried up, game moved away, crops failed. People were hungry, children were dying. The tribal council met to decide what to do, move to the government reservations, accept federal aid, abandon the old ways to save lives. He fell silent again, but this silence felt different, heavier, weighted with the approach of something that would change everything. I argued against it, said we should go deeper into the desert, find the hidden springs our ancestors had used during other droughts, hold to our ways, trust in the land to provide. His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. Ayana disagreed. She saw the children growing thin, the elders weakening. She said pride was a luxury we couldn't afford when people were suffering. Eliza began to understand the shape of what was coming, the terrible geography of guilt that had carved its lines into his face. We fought about it, not just disagreed, fought. Angry words, accusations, things said that couldn't be taken back. He looked at her directly for the first time since beginning the story. She left our house that night, went to stay with her sister, said she needed time to think, space to decide what was right. The fire popped, sending sparks up into the darkness. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, lonely and wild and free. She never made it to her sister's house, They found her the next morning at the bottom of Crying Woman Canyon. Her horse had stumbled in the dark, thrown her onto the rocks. Below. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Eliza felt her heart clench with understanding, with the terrible arithmetic of guilt that she knew too well. The tribal council said I had pushed her to leave, that my stubbornness had sent her out into the night where she wouldn't have gone otherwise. They were right. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, carrying the weight of a judgment accepted and internalized. If I had listened to her, trusted her wisdom instead of insisting on my own, she would still be alive. You couldn't have known. I could have gone after her, should have. Instead, I let my pride keep me home, while the woman I loved rode into darkness. He stared into the fire as if seeing scenes that played only for him. They exiled me from the tribal lands. Not officially. Too much politics involved for that. But the message was clear. I wasn't welcome anymore. Eliza understood now the careful distance he maintained, the way he served the community but held himself apart from it. He had built this place as penance, created home for others while denying it to himself. So you came here. Anna was working with displaced people, families who had lost their tribal connections for various reasons. She needed someone who understood both worlds, traditional ways and modern necessities. He shrugged. I needed work that mattered, purpose that wasn't about my own happiness. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire burning lower, stars emerging more clearly as the flames dimmed. Eliza thought about David, about the last conversation they had before he left for work that morning. Such an ordinary exchange. Plans for dinner, a reminder about a social obligation, a casual goodbye that had turned out to be permanent. I understand, she said finally. Do you? The guilt, the endless replaying of choices, wondering if different words or actions could have changed everything. She looked at him across the fire, this man who had saved her life while carrying his own unbearable weight. David and I had a fight that morning about money, about a decision to buy a new car. He left angry, and the last thing I said to him was that he was being irresponsible. Tahoma's eyes found hers, and in them she saw recognition, the terrible solidarity of those who had loved and lost through the sharp edges of human imperfection. The difference is that your husband's accident had nothing to do with your argument. Ayana's death was a direct result of my choices. Was it? Eliza leaned forward. Or was it the result of a horse stumbling, of darkness, of the 1,000 variables that make life unpredictable? You made choices, yes, but so did she. She chose to leave, chose to ride at night, chose her own response to your disagreement. I drove her to those choices. Maybe. Or maybe she was a grown woman making her own decisions about what she believed was right. Eliza thought about the community around them, about the children who trusted Tahoma instinctively, about the respect he commanded without demanding. Would the woman you've described want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for surviving when she didn't? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotions held too long in check. No, he said quietly. She'd be furious with me for wasting so many years on guilt instead of using them to honor what she believed in. Then maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself and start living in a way that would make her proud. The fire had burned down to coals, glowing red in the darkness around them. The desert hummed with the quiet life of night creatures going about their business of survival and connection. Why did you tell me this? Eliza asked. Because you matter to me, he said simply. Because you've become part of this place, part of the family here, and family shouldn't be built on secrets. He looked at her with eyes that held years of careful loneliness. Because I've been alone with this for too long, And you understand the weight of carrying blame for someone's death. She understood then that he hadn't been confessing to drive her away, but to draw her closer, to trust her with the truth that defined him, to let her choose whether to accept him as he was or withdraw to safer distance. "You're not alone anymore," she said. It was both promise and recognition, an acknowledgement that they had found in each other something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Not romance. They were both too raw for that, too careful with their healing hearts. But partnership in the work of learning to forgive themselves, to find meaning in the careful tending of life after loss. The fire settled into ash and memory. In the distance, dawn was still hours away, but already the desert was beginning its slow turn toward another day, another chance to choose healing over hiding. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had survived the unsurvivable, learning that sometimes the most important conversations happen in the spaces between words. Autumn came to the desert like a whispered secret, marked not by falling leaves but by the subtle shift in light, the way shadows fell differently across the red earth. The brutal heat of summer eased into something that merely scorched, and the community began preparations for the gentle season ahead. Eliza had been at the settlement for 6 months. Her hands were strong now, capable of kneading bread and milking goats and plaiting grass into baskets that were actually useful rather than merely decorative. Her Spanish had improved enough to joke with Maria, and she had learned to read the desert's moods, when storms were coming, when the snakes would be active, when the silence meant peace and when it meant danger. The children had claimed her completely. She was Tia Eliza now, Aunt Eliza, called upon to settle disputes, kiss scraped knees, and tell stories during the evening gatherings. Roberto, who at 7 carried himself with the gravity of someone much older, had appointed himself her special responsibility, bringing her interesting rocks and teaching her the names of desert plants in Spanish and Navajo. "You're different," Anna observed one evening as they prepared vegetables for the next day's meals. "Lighter, like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." Eliza considered this as she chopped onions, the familiar sting bringing tears that had nothing to do with sadness. "I think I've stopped trying to be who I was and started becoming who I am." It was true. The woman who had driven into the desert to die had been defined by loss, shaped entirely by what had been taken from her. This new person, the one who woke before dawn to help with baking, who knew which child needed extra attention and which needed space, who could feel the approach of weather in her bones, she was being defined by what she chose to give. "And what have you decided about the outside world?" Anna's question was gentle but pointed. They both knew Eliza couldn't stay indefinitely. The community was built around the idea of healing and moving forward, not hiding from life's complications. "I need to go back," Eliza said, surprised by her own certainty. "Not to stay, but to finish things, face what I left behind. And then," she paused, "then I come back here if you'll have me. Not as someone who's running away, but as someone who's chosen to run towards something." Anna smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "We'll have you. Question is whether you'll want to stay after you remember what the other world offers." That evening, Eliza found Tahoma working in the workshop behind his house, his hands shaping clay on a potter's wheel with the same patient attention he brought to all things. She had discovered his pottery weeks ago, but had never seen him actually creating. Only the finished pieces, bowls and cups and small sculptures that seemed to capture something essential about desert spirit. "May I watch?" she asked. "Do you mind if I watch?" she inquired. He gestured toward a nearby stool next to the pottery wheel. "Clay welcomes observers." She positioned herself next to him, captivated by the metamorphosis occurring beneath his skilled fingers. What had started as a shapeless mass was evolving into a container, molded by force and motion, and some inner vision she couldn't perceive, but could feel in the confidence of his movements. "I need to go away for some time," she announced. His hands continued their steady work, though she sensed his focus intensify. "For how long?" "I'm uncertain. Long enough to sort out legal matters, put the house on the market, confront my relatives." She observed the vessel taking shape under his guidance, its walls climbing smooth and uniform. "Long enough to ensure I'm actively choosing to remain here, rather than simply escaping from elsewhere." "And should you decide you prefer to stay in that other world?" The unspoken question lingered in the air between them, heavy with implications. Beyond its basic meaning, their bond had deepened over the passing months, not in a romantic sense, but through the profound connection of two souls who had discovered how to share their most protected secrets with each other. The thought of departing from him, of severing the delicate alliance they had constructed, seemed like destroying something that had only just started to mend. "Then I'll understand I made an effort," she replied, "and you'll understand that whatever decision I reach, it's genuine." He removed his hands from the clay, allowing the wheel to gradually stop. The vessel rested between them, finished yet delicate, still pliable enough to crumble if treated carelessly. "When?" he questioned. "Shortly, before the cold season arrives, and makes travel challenging." She gazed at the pot, at how it caught and reflected the workshop's warm light. "Will you preserve it for me? My room, that is, should I return?" "Anna maintains spaces for those who require them. She always has." He looked directly into her eyes. "But yes, I'll preserve yours specifically, for however long it requires." The commitment was straightforward, matter-of-fact, yet it struck her as the most tender gesture anyone had ever offered. Not a profession of love, but something more profound, an acknowledgement that certain bonds transcend physical presence, that affection can endure separation and doubt, and the countless complexities of existence lived in the chaotic world beyond the desert's sheltering quiet. That evening, she sat in her modest room and composed 2 messages. The first was addressed to Karen. "I'm returning home for a visit, not permanently, but long enough to handle business matters and explain myself adequately. I'll contact you when I have travel arrangements." The second letter was for David, though she understood he would never see it. "I discovered a method of existing without you that doesn't diminish what we shared. I found individuals who comprehend that love doesn't cease with death. It simply transforms. I believe you would appreciate them. I believe you would support my being here, engaging in this work, evolving into this person. My love for you remains eternal, but I refuse to let it consume me anymore." She sealed both letters, then positioned herself by her window, observing the celestial display. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of her departure from this sanctuary that had rescued her existence. Within several weeks, she would re-enter the realm of timetables and duties, among people who judged recovery by superficial measures. Yet she no longer feared that world. She had mastered carrying tranquility within herself, discovering purpose in modest acts of compassion, trusting that healing remained achievable even when it bore no resemblance to others' expectations. She felt prepared to depart because she was finally ready to return home. The urban environment hit her like a physical blow after months surrounded by desert stillness. An overwhelming cacophony of overlapping sounds, vehicles and machinery, and the persistent electronic buzz of gadgets demanding notice. Competing aromas vying for attention, fumes and coffee, and the artificial mixture of metropolitan existence. Excessive movement lacking direction. Individuals racing toward objectives that appeared critically important, momentarily yet meaningless within life's broader perspective. Eliza remained in the rental vehicle outside her former residence, attempting to reconcile the woman who had escaped this location with the woman who had come back to it. The structure appeared diminished somehow, or perhaps she had expanded during her absence, not in body but spiritually, enlarged by experience and the realization that security could be discovered in the most basic elements, that home was something carried internally rather than possessed externally. The key still operated the lock, but the door revealed a space resembling a memorial to another person's existence. Everything remained exactly as she had abandoned it. David's mug still rested in the basin, his novel still lay open beside the bed, their shared life preserved like specimens in resin. Karen had clearly maintained the property, keeping it prepared for her sister's return, but maintenance differed from actual living. She moved through each room deliberately, touching recognizable items that felt foreign beneath her fingertips. The costly dishware they had requested for their wedding, rarely utilized because it seemed too valuable for regular meals. The artwork they had selected together, acquired because it complemented the furnishings rather than because it inspired them. The collection of possessions that had once appeared significant now seemed like proof of a partially lived existence, held in reserve for some special moment that never materialized. The bedroom presented the greatest challenge. David's clothing still occupied the wardrobe. His spectacles still sat on the nightstand beside the book he would never complete. Eliza, perched on the mattress edge and attempted to experience something, sorrow, nostalgia, attachment to their shared past. Instead, she felt only gentle melancholy, like viewing photographs of pleasant strangers she had never actually encountered. She remained there when Karen appeared, materializing in the doorway like a natural force, equipped with covered dishes and resolve. Thank heavens, Karen exhaled, setting aside her burdens and crossing the space to embrace Eliza in a hug scented with costly fragrance and familiar urgency. I've been incredibly concerned. We all have. You appear... She stepped back to examine Eliza's features, clearly seeking signs of harm, evidence of whatever crisis had compelled her sister to abandon her existence and vanish into the wilderness. Changed, Eliza responded. I appear changed. Slender. And so tanned. Haven't you been applying sun protection, and what occurred to your hands? Karen inspected Eliza's palms, noting the rough skin and minor marks that indicated labor performed with implements and soil and meaningful exertion. I've been laboring. Manual labor. It benefits me. Karen's expression suggested she considered this explanation inadequate, potentially irrational. Manual labor. Eliza, you possess an advanced degree in literature. You don't require manual labor. It perfectly illustrated the distance between them that Eliza nearly laughed. The notion that education provided exemption from the fulfillment of constructing and cultivating and caring. That intellectual work somehow surpassed the ancient human joy of producing useful items with one's hands. I desired to, she stated simply. It appears I have talent for it. They devoted the afternoon to cautious dialogue, Karen explaining the legal complications that had gathered during Eliza's absence, the choices requiring attention regarding David's business partnership, the insurance resolutions needing her signature, practical issues that could have been managed through telephone and correspondence, but had been permitted to accumulate, possibly as incentive to guarantee her return. The house, Karen mentioned as they organized documents. The market conditions are favorable currently. You could receive an outstanding price. Purchase something more modest. Invest the remainder. I plan to sell it, Eliza agreed. But not to acquire something else locally. Karen's pen ceased moving. What do you mean? I mean I'm not remaining. I have an existence elsewhere now, work that holds meaning for me. People who depend on me. People who depend on you. Karen's voice elevated with the particular tone reserved for discussions of mental health emergencies. Eliza, you've been absent for 6 months. Whatever attachment you believe you formed with these individuals is likely just appreciation for assisting you through a difficult period. That's not equivalent to a genuine life. The dismissal stung, partially because Eliza could understand how it might appear from an outside perspective. A mourning woman fleeing to the desert, discovering temporary solace among strangers, confusing healing with belonging. But she had anticipated this response, had prepared for it during the lengthy drive back to her former existence. "You're correct," she said. "It began as appreciation, but it evolved into something else. I evolved into someone else." She described the community to Karen, the children who addressed her as teacher, the work that filled her days with purpose rather than distraction. She attempted to convey the satisfaction of preparing bread that would nourish people she cherished, of instructing children whose futures were being influenced by every interaction, of belonging to something greater than her personal grief. Karen listened with the patient expression of someone accommodating a relative's delusion. "It sounds wonderful." "Eliza, truly, but it's not practical. What about medical coverage, retirement preparation? What happens as you age and can no longer perform physical work?" The questions were sensible, pragmatic, grounded in the genuine challenges of selecting a life outside society's conventional frameworks. They were also irrelevant in a manner that Eliza couldn't determine how to clarify. "I don't know," she said eventually. "I don't know what will occur in 20 or 30 years. I simply know that presently, for the first time since David's death, I feel like I'm truly living rather than merely surviving." That night, alone in the house that no longer felt like home, Eliza contacted the settlement's communal telephone. Anna responded, her voice warm and immediate despite the distance. "How are you managing in the noisy world?" she asked. "It's noisy," Eliza confirmed, "and complex, and I now understand why people remain here instead of returning to places like this." "But you're coping. I'm coping. Karen believes I've joined a religious group or experienced a breakdown or both." Anna's laughter was rich and understanding. "People always think that when you choose differently than they would choose, how long until you can return home?" Home. The word settled into Eliza's chest like a key discovering its proper lock. Not the structure surrounding her with its careful preservation of a concluded life, but the small adobe chamber where she awakened to roosters and slept to coyote calls, where her presence mattered and her work held significance. 2 weeks, perhaps 3. There's more documentation than I anticipated, and I want to spend time with my mother. Take whatever time you need. Your room will be there. Your place in the work will be there. We'll be there. After ending the call, Eliza sat in David's chair and tried to imagine explaining to him what she had discovered in the desert, what she was choosing to return to. He had been a good man, a compassionate man, but also a traditional one. He had valued security, planned for the future, believed in the importance of constructing a life that could withstand others' scrutiny. Would he understand her choice? Would he approve of the woman she was becoming? She thought he might. David had loved her curiosity, her willingness to ask challenging questions even when they led to uncomfortable answers. He had wanted her to be happy, to find meaning, to use her gifts in service of something that mattered. The life she was choosing wouldn't have been his choice, but it was authentically hers. That, she thought, would have been sufficient for him. It was sufficient for her. The estate sale was a peculiar form of grief archaeology, observing strangers examine the objects that had once defined a shared life. Eliza found herself strangely detached from the process, watching the careful inspection of wedding gifts and furniture and books, as if they belonged to people she had once known, but couldn't quite recall. A young couple became enchanted with. the dining room set she and David had saved for months to purchase, exclaiming over the wood quality and craftsmanship. They would create memories around that table, she realized, fill it with their own disputes and celebrations and ordinary Tuesday dinners that would accumulate into a lifetime of shared experience. It's difficult watching people examine your life like this, said Helena, the estate sale coordinator. She was a compassionate woman with gentle eyes who specialized in helping people transition between life chapters. But try to think of it as giving these things new purpose. They get to be useful again instead of just preserved. Eliza nodded, understanding the wisdom in this perspective. The objects had been in suspension since David's death, maintained but not used, honored but not loved. Letting them go was another form of healing, releasing them to serve their intended function in other people's stories. She kept very little. David's grandmother's wedding ring, which she would have melted down and made into something new. A few photographs. The cast-iron skillet they had used to make pancakes every Sunday morning, and a small wooden box he had carved for her during their first year of marriage, awkward and lopsided, but made with such careful attention that it had become more precious than anything they could have purchased. The rest could go, the accumulation of a life lived in anticipation of someday, when they would have time to appreciate the good china and read all the books and display the art properly. Someday had been cancelled by a moment of inattention on a rainy Tuesday morning, and the objects that had waited patiently for their purpose could find new owners who might be wiser about the difference between having and living. Her mother took the news of her departure better than expected, perhaps because Eliza had learned to present her choice as movement towards something rather than flight from something else. "You've always been different," her mother said as they sorted through photo albums in the house where Eliza had grown up. "Even as a child, you asked questions that made me uncomfortable. Why do we do things this way? What if there's another way? I used to worry about it, thought it meant you'd never be satisfied with anything. Were you right?" Her mother studied a photograph of Eliza at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a butterfly she had rescued from a spider's web. "I was right that you'd never be satisfied with just anything. But maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that's what it takes to find something worth being satisfied with." The conversation with her mother was easier than the one with Karen, who had moved from concern through frustration to a kind of resigned disappointment that felt worse than anger would have. "I don't understand you," Karen said as they sat in the coffee shop where they had always conducted their most serious conversations. "You have every advantage, every opportunity, and you're choosing to throw it all away for what? To play pioneer woman in the desert?" "I'm choosing to live meaningfully instead of safely," Eliza said. "There's a difference. Is there? Or are you just afraid to deal with real life, real responsibilities, real relationships that require work and compromise?" The accusation hit closer to home than Eliza wanted to admit. Was she running towards something or away from something? Was her choice brave or cowardly? The questions had been haunting her throughout the weeks of paperwork and arrangements, the practical business of dismantling one life to make space for another. "Maybe both," she said finally. "Maybe I am afraid of building another life like the one I had with David, where we were always preparing for some perfect future that never came. But I'm also excited about building something different, something immediate, something that doesn't require deferring happiness until the timing is right." Karen stirred her coffee with the precise motions of someone trying to maintain control of a conversation that was slipping away from her. "What if it doesn't work out? What if you get tired of the physical work or the isolation or the lack of modern conveniences? What if you meet someone and want to have children and realize you've painted yourself into a corner?" They were legitimate questions, the kind of practical considerations that responsible adults were supposed to think through before making major life changes. but they were also based on the assumption that security came from having a plan, that happiness could be achieved through careful risk management and strategic decision-making. "Then I'll figure something else out," Eliza said. "The same way people always have when their circumstances change. The same way I figured out how to keep breathing after David died, how to stop wanting to die, how to find reasons to get up in the morning." "You're different," Karen said, echoing their mother's observation. "I don't know if I like who you're becoming." The words stung because they were probably true. The woman Eliza was becoming might indeed be someone Karen didn't recognize or approve of. Less careful, less concerned with others' opinions, more willing to prioritize meaning over security. Someone who had learned that survival sometimes required letting go of who you used to be. "I like who I'm becoming," Eliza said quietly. "For the first time in a long time, I actually like myself. That has to count for something." The flight back to Phoenix felt like traveling between worlds, from the green complexity of her old life to the honest simplicity of the desert. As the plane descended through layers of dry air toward red earth and endless sky, Eliza felt something in her chest unwind, tensions she hadn't realized she was carrying releasing their grip on her ribs. Tahoma was waiting at the small airport, leaning against his ancient truck with the patient stillness that had become familiar and dear. When he saw her coming through the terminal doors, something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but a softening that spoke of relief, of gratitude for her return. "How was it?" he asked as they drove through the familiar landscape toward home. "Necessary," she said. "Sad, complicated, but finished." They drove in comfortable silence, the desert spreading around them like a promise of space and time, and the possibility of building something authentic from the ground up. The settlement appeared gradually as they approached, lights beginning to twinkle in the windows as evening settled over the community. Anna met them at the door of the community house, her embrace warm and welcoming and free of questions. "There's soup," she said simply, "and people who missed you and work that's been waiting for your hands." It was the perfect welcome home, practical, immediate, focused on present needs rather than past complications. Eliza felt the last of her tension dissolve as she stepped back into the rhythm of communal life, into the simple satisfaction of belonging somewhere that valued her presence without questioning her choices. That night she sat in her small room and unpacked the few things she had brought back from her old life. David's wooden box, which she placed on the windowsill where it could catch the morning light. The cast-iron skillet, which would serve the community kitchen well. The photographs which she arranged on the small shelf Anna had built during her absence, evidence of love given and received, proof that she had been blessed with goodness even though it had ended too soon. But not ending the story, just changing its direction, teaching her that loss didn't have to mean emptiness, that grief could be transformed into something that honored what was gone while embracing what remained. She was home. Spring in the high desert was a contradiction, bursts of impossible color against the backdrop of earth that seemed too harsh to sustain such beauty. Palo Verde trees erupted in yellow blooms, brittlebush painted the hillsides gold, and tiny wildflowers appeared overnight like scattered jewels across the hardpan. The community celebrated the season with a festival that combined traditions from many cultures, honoring the miracle of life persisting in the harshest places. Eliza had been back for 6 months, long enough to settle completely into the rhythm of this life she had chosen. Her hands were competent now with all the tasks that sustained the community, baking, gardening, tending animals, teaching children. She had learned to read weather in the color of morning sky, to predict the mood of the old truck by the sound of its engine, to measure time by the flowering of different plants rather than the passing of hours. The children had welcomed her return with the uncomplicated joy of those who had never doubted she would come back. Roberto, now 8 and even more serious about his role as her special guardian, had saved rocks for her throughout her absence, presenting them with the ceremony due to precious gifts. "I knew you would return," he told her solemnly. "Tia said you might not, but I knew you belong here with us." The certainty of children who understood belonging in ways that adults often forgot, not as something earned through performance or proven through endurance, but as simple recognition. This person fits with these people in this place, creating something larger than the sum of its parts. She was working in the garden when Tahoma found her on the morning of the festival, her hands buried in earth that was finally warming toward the promise of summer. He had been away for several days, visiting other communities, sharing resources and knowledge in the way that kept these small settlements connected across the vast distances of the desert. "How was the trip?" she asked, sitting back on her heels, to look at him properly. He looked tired but satisfied, carrying the particular contentment that came from work well done. "Good. Productive." He settled beside her in the dirt, his presence comfortable and familiar. "I brought something back for you." From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. Eliza wiped her hands on her clothes before accepting it, curious about the weight and shape beneath the covering. Inside the leather was a piece of pottery, a small bowl, perfectly round, glazed in colors that captured the essence of desert sunset. Orange and red and purple swirled together like captured sky, beautiful and functional, and somehow exactly right. "I made it before you left," he said quietly. "Finished it while you were gone. Thought if you didn't come back, I'd have something to remember you by. But you did come back, so now it's just a bowl." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that made her throat tight with emotion. He had prepared for her absence while hoping for her return, had created beauty, while facing the possibility of loss. It was so perfectly like him, practical and romantic at once, grounded in reality but open to hope. "It's perfect," she said, meaning more than the bowl itself. "Thank you." They worked together in comfortable silence, planting seeds that would feed the community through the growing season. Around them, the settlement buzzed with festival preparations, children practicing songs, adults arranging tables for the evening feast, teenagers stringing lights between the buildings. "There's something else," Tahoma said as they finished their work. "Something I've been thinking about while you were gone, while you've been back, while we've been... whatever we've been doing." Eliza looked at him curiously. In all their time together, he had never sounded uncertain, never struggled for words in quite this way. "I've been alone for a long time," he continued, "by choice mostly. Thought it was what I deserved, what Diana would have wanted, punishment for the choices that led to her death." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands with movements that seemed more agitated than necessary. "But watching you leave and come back, watching you choose this life, not because you were running from something, but because you were moving toward something. It made me wonder if maybe I'd been wrong about what she would want." He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the desert that stretched beyond the settlement toward mountains that shimmered in the morning heat. "I think she would want me to be happy. I think she would want me to stop punishing myself and start living in a way that honors what we had, by remaining open to what might be possible." Eliza's heart began to beat faster, understanding beginning to dawn like sunrise over familiar landscape. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said quickly. "I'm not even sure what I'm asking for exactly. Just permission to stop holding myself at distance from you, from this, from whatever we might become if we're both brave enough to let it happen." She stood as well, facing him across the small space between them. He had saved her life, had brought her to this place that had become home, had shared his deepest truths without asking for anything in return. But more than that, he had become essential to her daily happiness, the person she looked for in morning gatherings, whose opinion mattered when decisions needed to be made, whose presence made ordinary moments feel significant. "I love David," she said carefully. "Part of me will always love him. That doesn't change. I know, and I loved Diana will always love her. That doesn't change either." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "But love isn't finite. Loving them doesn't mean we can't love again, can't build something new that honors what was while embracing what is." It was true. She realized. The love she carried for David felt different now, not diminished but transformed. Like grief had been transformed from something that destroyed into something that connected her more deeply to the fundamental preciousness of being alive, being present, being open to the unexpected gifts that could emerge from the deepest losses. "No promises about the future," she said. "No assumptions about what this means or where it leads. No promises except to be honest with each other, to remain open to whatever we're becoming." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she needed to, and took her earth-stained hands in his equally dirty ones, to let it be what it is, instead of trying to make it into something else. Around them the festival preparations continued, laughter and music, and the cheerful chaos of community celebration. Children ran between the adults carrying messages and small responsibilities that made them feel important. The smell of bread baking mixed with the fragrance of desert flowers and the wood smoke that seemed to be a permanent part of the settlement's atmosphere. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without complications, but authentically hers in a way that nothing had been since David's death. Built from conscious choices rather than inherited expectations, shaped by values she had discovered rather than assumptions she had accepted without examination. "What do you think?" Tahoma asked softly. She looked at him, this man who had found her dying and taught her how to live again, who carried his own ghosts with such grace, who had helped her build a home in the most unlikely place, and felt her heart settle into certainty. "I think," she said, "that we're exactly where we need to be." The festival that evening was a celebration of many things: the changing season, the community that sustained them all, the simple fact of survival in a harsh and beautiful place. But for Eliza, it felt like a celebration of becoming, of the long journey from the woman who had driven into the desert to die, to the woman who had chosen to live, to love, to build something meaningful from the pieces of a broken heart. As the sun set behind the mountains and the stars emerged in their millions, she sat beside Tahoma and felt the deep satisfaction of being exactly who she was meant to be, in exactly the place she was meant to be, surrounded by people who understood that home wasn't a destination, but a choice made new each day. The desert stretched around them, vast and patient and full of life, that persisted against all odds, like love, like hope, like the human capacity to find meaning in the most unexpected places, beauty in the most challenging circumstances, connection in the space between one broken heart and another. She was home, she was whole, she was ready for whatever came next.